Hi, and welcome back to the Mob Mentality Show. I'm Chris Lucian, and my co-host is Austin Chadwick. And today we have Phil Markgraf to talk to us about mobbing as a keystone of third generation extreme programming. What do we do when mobbing is not an option? And mobbing enabling safety critical and high reliability software. But first off, Phil, why don't you go ahead and give us an introduction, and then we can get into our conversation.
Thank you, Chris. Austin, it's a real pleasure to be here. I have been writing software for altogether too long, and been in the industry for about 35 years. From very early on, I've been working in embedded systems, usually in high reliability systems, sometimes in safety critical medical devices. A fair amount of that time has been doing leadership roles, where I only get to program maybe a third of the time. I had the good fortune to get introduced to extreme programming very early on and have used that to deliver medical devices and giant jukeboxes and all sorts of different devices. And then again, have moved into using mob programming as a technique, again, to deliver high quality products and create really happy teams. And I'm very excited to see it move forward and to talk with the two of you about how we apply it sometimes.
Nice, nice. Well, cool. Well, maybe we can jump right into that first topic. I like this one because I feel like I've had this feeling before as well. Is this like the third generation of XP? Yeah. So, what are your thoughts here?
Well, it came out of a conversation that I had with a fairly well-known name in the XP Agile world, and I was talking with some enthusiasm about mob programming, and had them back and say mob programming is just three or more people. And to me, I thought, no, mob programming is mixing all of these practices that evolved starting out with XP, and they work together in concert. Like having more than one person doesn't get you the magic, right? You get the value out of mixing test-driven development and rapid techniques to make sure that you've got quick feedback cycles. And really the way that I thought Extreme Programming did a great job of putting together sort of 12 practices that each one lifted the other one up. And so when I said mob programming, I meant this whole ensemble of things, how I saw your team doing it at Hunter and how I was trying to bring it into the teams that I was working with. And as I say, other people had a much more limited view of it. And so my thought was, well, what do we call this thing that has all these practices working together to create a great environment for making software together?
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah,
That's
that's a good
Go ahead,
question.
Chris.
Yeah, because I mean, yeah. So, I think we in our environment use lean and agile, systems thinking, extreme programming, all the way up to all kinds of even different forms of negotiation habits and other things like that, right? So a lot of things are focused on, you know, habits that we've found to be virtuous in nature, I guess. And so, yeah, I think a lot of those things are implied when somebody says mob programming, but somebody new to mob programming, that would be ambiguous and maybe, perhaps even not extremely visible. So, yeah, like, are there any other practices or habitual things that you feel like fall in there that come to mind?
I know how I was thinking of it is just watching, sort of starting out with extreme programming, sort of as written the first time. There have been very things that have come in just like that. I mean, sometime early on, our team switched from fixed length iterations into Kanban. Somewhere along the line, we had domain driven design supplanting the metaphor concept, right? Uh, Dan North and his group talked about TDD in a different way. And that came out as behavior driven development, which I think is just a great way to think about how do you create your tests. And then subsequently, people are now talking about that in terms of executable specification, which is, I think, a really powerful idea in environments where requirements are important, like high reliability and safety critical and such. And so I see all these things moving the practices forward. And if you look at like the whole team concept inside of XP, it's being improved upon by radical candor, psychological safety, right? We had simple design. I think if you go and you look at Rich Hickey's talk, Simple Made Easy, talks about how do we quantify simplicity. And I think that's a really, powerful. How did all these things add on and grow? And so I don't know if there's necessarily one set, but I think there's how did the state of the art move forward? And so I talked about this as third generation XP because I kind of see a couple different important points, real inflection points, and these lots of small steps along the way. I mean, certainly the original Kent Beck book is, what I would say first generation. And I think the industry really took to that, and it was, really the seed that the Agile revolution grew out of. And I think the next sort of big inflection point that I see is the continuous delivery book from Jez Humble, Dave Farley. To me, that expanded the scope of what we were doing XP on. But it was really just XP. And if you'd asked Kent and stuff, I'd have said, yeah, I intended all along. But I think how they articulated it grew everybody's view about what's our responsibility and where do we deliver value and how do we use fast feedback methods? How do we move that fast feedback farther into the delivery process? And so I see that as really the second generation point of extreme programming. And then what got discovered at Hunter and has been, proselytized with mob programming, when you mix that in as not just mob programs 3+, but as this complete set of practices, I see that as really the third major inflection point in this journey that, Kent and company laid the seeds for back in whatever, 99, 98. And so that's why I use the term XP third generation. I'm not sure that's the best name, but it kind of talks about the history and how do we get here, and helps me think about it. So
yeah, absolutely.
Where other places do you see on this journey?
Yeah, sorry. One more time. What was that last question?
Oh, I was saying, I talked about my vision of how this journey's gone. You talked about some of the practices that you see. What other places, what other like important points do you see on this journey that's been from sort of XP to mobbing today?
Yeah, I think you summarized it well. I think, generally speaking, making things safer, more reliable, value delivered more frequently, an acknowledgement that we're in a constant state of experimentation. I think is also an important piece, and going from there, automating repetitive behaviors. I think even that it is quite important along there. I don't know, Austin, you have any more to add?
Yeah, and I think you guys have done a great list, and the list goes on, and I think that's part of the challenge with this question, right? Like, and I've seen the community go back and forth on this too, right? Like, there's two definitions from conversations with Woody that I'm aware of. So one is like the original one you see on Woody's original talks, which is like all the brilliant minds working on the same time, same space, same thing, same space, same computer. And that feels very much orchestrated, kind of like what you said earlier, Phil, with like more than two people working together. Like it's like almost like the slim definition. And then Woody also is another one. Let's work together well and turn up the good on flow efficiency, right? And I think there's a lot of things in life that I feel like have this problem, that it's so rich and so good that it's hard to describe simply, right? And any simple description will fail. And so it's like, where do you start? And in the answer is, I kind of don't know. Because I know with certain audiences, if you're like, well, mobbing doesn't go well unless you have this, and as you know, the list can get really, really long. And then it can also get kind of prescriptive too, because maybe some environments don't need the 11th and 13th thing on the list, and they only need the 5th thing and not the first thing. And so I don't know, my raw reaction to kind of this question, what do we call it, is I almost feel like um, the reason why I'm so passionate about mobbing itself is that the practice of the more than two people is the foundation for all those other things. All those other things to spread and do well, right? Because without that, it's kind of happening in a corner, and there's good things you can do with that. But as once there's more than two people and you have a mob and they're trying certain things, maybe they pick one thing from the list that you talked about and they're working on that and they're helping that spread in the organization. It's just such a wonderful foundation for all the other things that the kind of concrete practice of multiple people working well together, even if they're not doing TDD yet, or even if they're not doing BDD yet, or even if they're not doing CD yet, is a good foundation for all those other things. But if I just talk about that simple practice, it feels too slim. It's like that's not covering it all. So there's some random ramblings for you, but
Yeah. No,
thoughts?
I mean that kind of ties me maybe to some earlier thoughts that I had about this, which is like so I believe like the virtuous loop, right, is something that you need. So this idea of dedicated learning time and a regular experimentation cycle, usually led by retrospective. So it's, you're doing retrospectives and you're doing learning. And then when you add mobbing into that, I think it just creates protection for the experimentation, and it also creates this like a support system. So you feel more comfortable trying something because you have people there with you, and you are less likely to get derailed by somebody saying, "Hey, what are you doing?" Um, and so yeah, so I like I feel like if you have the virtuous loop and then you introduce mobbing, then it's like adoption of individual practices as you go forward slowly grows the thing. So that's a little bit of how I look at it, because often, um, when people have told me that they've tried mobbing and it's failed for them, like the first question I ask is, do you have retrospectives with action items that you act on? And then the second thing I ask is, do you have dedicated learning time so that you can incorporate new ideas into that experimentation? Because usually I think those are like some of the prerequisites that aren't met that lead things, let things go off the rails pretty badly. But yeah, but then maybe you adopt all of, a whole bunch of practices along the way, um, given that experimentation.
Yeah.
So Phil, you
Yeah.
got some experience out there in the real world. I guess my follow-up question is, how do you usually present it to a team? Do you start with a list of 20 things? Do you start with one thing? Like, how does that usually work for you?
So I usually start with test-driven development, and to
Nice.
for me, that's very much a cornerstone
Mm.
because it gives you this great focus on fast feedback. Right? It's all about giving you a way to say, did my experiment succeed or not? It's not the only way, right? There's certain points where you don't know enough about something where you can't even think of a test. But for most cases, I think. And so for teams that I've come into where I was trying to address a dysfunction of the team, right? That's coming in with a team and they're floundering, not able to deliver. What do we do? Um, I actually start with um, sort of code katas in a learning environment, and don't say change your regular day job. You go focus on what you're doing there, but we're going to take an hour out of 3 days a week, and we're going to learn this new thing about test room development. And oh, by the way, we're going to do it as a team, and we're going to do this weird thing called mobbing, but it's just for training, and we'll just try this and go off and use that as a way to have them start building up those skills. And the teams that I've done this with, I've had one team that did really well where um, we did this for about 3 months. And then I said, okay, we're starting this next project. And the only thing that I require is that you have automated tests for it. And anything else, you figure out process. You don't have to do everything. And it's a hardware project. We were adding new features to an old product. And we were able to find a toehold where we could get like serial ports to talk into the display buffer. It was a LCD sort of display. And you could read what all the elements of the LCD was. And we had somebody set up relays controlled by another hardware board, and we could simulate this whole controller board, do all of the things that a user would interact with, and test it as a hardware and loop tester. So I'd figure that out and said, here's your toehold. Go build your automation on that. The team realized no one person could do this work on their own. And so they said, why don't we do this mobbing thing? And they worked together and they were able to then solve and make this testable system. And they basically kept doing it afterwards. I found that's what worked. And so I think it's the getting them a small safe space to work in to start learning it. And then I think you've had a similar experience. When something became a challenge, they fell back to leaning on each other and then discovered they liked it. And off we went. I've also had the fortune of building a team from zero in this time. And at that point, we did all the interviewing as a mob. And from day one, you got hired knowing you were going to be in a mob. But, you know, the first two people came in and their mob was, hey, you get to mob with Phil. And so we were three people because we hired two people in kind of close succession. And then slowly we grew that group in about 10 people. But each person that came in, you know, interview with two or three people, did TDD, did the whole cycle, retrospected in the interview. And so that was a really great way to kind of build it too. But you rarely have that that sort of build from scratch opportunity.
Nice. Right on. Good stuff. Well, I definitely want to hear more about the safety critical and high reliability systems, but I had one thought, a hypothesis to throw out there, inspired by two things from actually a few things. Phil generating this conversation. Two is Woody's definitions of mobbing, like the really slim definitions. And then Chris's thing that he's taught me over the years as communication as experimentation. So I used to be like, my first communication with someone would be like paragraphs, you know, whether verbally or text or whatever. And it was more like, well, try one small thing and then iterate on that and see how it goes first, right? So one hypothesis is how to describe the kind of mobbing movement is maybe to use one of Woody's slim definitions, and then see how it goes from there. But maybe use one of the slim definitions, but hint at the richness that there's more, you know what I mean? But not go into the 20 different things right away. I don't know. What are you guys' thoughts on that hypothesis?
I think it's reasonable. I think yeah, so for me, like I said, I think it's the act of mobbing, right? The more than three or more people programming together. I think that adds a layer, right? So it's all, you know, so if you did Woody's definition of like all the, you know, all the right people you know, working together on the same computer at the same time. And you expanded that with some level of experimentation and implied learning, right? Learning organization stuff, double loop learning type stuff, and then I think eventually you naturally get to extreme programming. When we first started mobbing, the team was learning about TDD, but wasn't doing TDD in their code. And the first code that we mobbed on was not test driven. But no one on the team knew TDD either at that time, except in like katas and things. And so, yeah, I think you can get to it from different places, right? But like, you know, I think fundamentally for me, it's the core of a of both experimenting toward better and then ingesting new information to supersede or to surpass your current maximum. Right?
I wonder where that like that sense of challenge for the team. How do we do an experiment, and then how do we hold ourselves accountable to improving from it? You know, is that, you know, do you need that person somewhere in your team to sort of, you know, maybe they're player coach, maybe they're, you know, just, I don't know what role they are, but it's I think you need somebody who's going to ask that question every once in a while.
Well, yeah, and it's funny because I just heard somebody on one of our teams say like, oh, we realized that, we weren't doing the action items on our retros for a while now. And so like I think people can fall into that habit easily, right? So I think no matter what, it needs a champion, right? And because even if you're mobbing, but you're not performing your action items, you're not experimenting toward better, Kaizen activities are not happening, I guess. Then you end up in a state of uh kind of coasting or whatever, and that I think is dangerous because you're basically not going to get to a point where you realize something's wrong until much, much later. Um, and so, yeah, I agree. You have to have somebody passionate about acting on action items, and that's just some level of like concrete experimentation coming out the other side. I think that's like the biggest pitfall is that anybody can be in, really, is um, that the stepping, or inching toward better is not happening.
Yeah. Yeah, I think
So
go ahead, Phil. Yeah.
one of the things that has been interesting to me watching the whole Agile thing happen is, I mean, it's been spread where a lot of stuff happened in software and then is going infecting other parts of organizations. Um, and if we are honest with ourselves, frankly, it all came out of manufacturing anyways, right? Was inspired by manufacturing processes. And one of the things that like I've done in the past is had mobbing training for mechanical, electrical engineers, electrochemists, right? The researchers on a team that was making, embedded hardware, right? So we had the whole engineering organization take that learning, and they different levels, different groups did better with it. I think the electrical engineers of the team really took to it, did a ton of work as group, four of them together, brainstorming on a problem, figuring out the challenges, reviewing each other's work, doing the retrospectives, doing more learning and such. And I guess if you looked at this as not like TDD first, TDD is really very softwarey in its nature. Maybe it's not, but how I at least I executed it, it very much is. And
Yeah.
if you were doing most of these ideas about process experimentation, of focusing on flow, um, apply to maybe any of the engineering disciplines, and can spread wider. And so if we describe them that way, then they become much more applicable.
Right. Right. Yeah. I think I'm with you that ifs, I often find myself saying mob TDD as like, make sure these two things go together, right? But if you're not doing code, yeah, then the TDD part is dropped, right? And yeah, for sure, for sure. And I think you're right. I think Chris and I have seen that sometimes mobs don't have like a super awesome player coach making great mobbing happen, and sometimes those people emerge. But it does stack the deck in your favor if you have someone like that on the mob. I think, because I've definitely seen mobs go off the rails where they lacked that, and it just the mob was the vehicle to spread bad things. Is what I've seen that happen before too. So it's like it was good at it's like a machete, good for bad things and good things, and I've seen it spread bad things. And so yeah, I think I've landed on that opinion over the years. And well, so you've mentioned now a few times kind of these really cross-functional teams, electrical, mechanical, firmware, software, safety critical, high reliability. Is this the world you were in before and then discovered mob, or were you mobbing before and then brought it into this world? What's kind of the story there for you, Phil? Yeah.
I've spent my entire career in embedded systems, so working in a
Yeah.
cross-functional team with people doing mechanical engineering, electrical engineering, all
Okay.
kinds of different versions of electrical engineering. Some folks doing analog where they're reading data off tape and such. I've worked with people who are pneumaticists who are moving air through pipes for ventilating patients. We've worked with ultrasound experts, all kinds of different disciplines, all working together to bring a device
Mm.
out. And yeah, quite a variety of different things. We made, like I say, tape recorders for military applications, big jukeboxes. I've made robotic ultrasound systems. I made ventilators for quite a long time. And again, applying XP processes and mob practices to many of these going on, and have found it to be very successful in these kind of devices. And for the same reason, it probably works in a pure software sort of, web application sort of thing. Where you're going and you're getting fast feedback. You're letting the interactions with your other teammates get brought up by the tests you write. Right? If you write a test of a system, you're not, and it controls hardware. When you do testing with that hardware, you're going to exercise the hardware and find the problems in it. And so it's turned out to be a very healthy process for getting high reliability and safety critical products to market. So
Nice.
My journey to today in mobbing starts out with how do we make these kind of devices so that when you turn them on, they stay on for the next 3 years, or how do we keep it without hurting or killing somebody? It's you spend a lot of time up late at night worrying about it. Am I going to hurt somebody with this medical device? And having XP, having test-driven development, honestly, is a technique to help me sleep well at night when the device can honestly have pretty dire repercussions.
Yeah. I had a follow-up question on this because I haven't been, like, the software I've worked on for the last 15 years has been important, but it's never been like you were talking about, like the safety critical, like, someone's heart is depending on this to work kind of thing, that moment or whatever. And like you said, highly regulated. And I was having a dialogue online recently, and they were saying that relying on TDD can be seen as complacent, because the only way in a system like that to really know it works is you have to manually exercise it or whatever. What's been your experience with your reliance on tests in a world where the manual test would matter a lot? What's the interplay between those two for you? Yeah.
Well, so it's interesting. In medical devices, what's required of you is a whole very detailed process. And they describe this whole process as what's called the quality V. And in that, you have going down one side, you have various layers of specification to go on. So where maybe you start with a marketing specification, and then you start with a whole product specification. And then you specify what is the software going to do. And then you specify an architecture, and then you do detailed design. And you go up the other side with tests of all these, right? So your detailed design gets unit tests done. Your architecture may have sort of testing of inter-module communication. Your software requirements may have whole integration tests, right? You test the whole application as one layer. And that's often maybe the software requirements, and you're getting into the product requirements too, where you're testing, does this software control the hardware? All of that can be automated, right? All that's very well suited to doing automation, and it's very well suited to doing a test first approach. So you go and you write a test of the big thing. I'm going to, set this setting, and at the end, this motor that's pushing air out is going to run this fast, right? And you can put equipment on it, read the RPMs off of it or read the pressure coming out. And so you write a test that says, I'm going to, insert this command, and at the other side, I'm going to read this pressure gauge and tell me that I'm getting the expected pressure when my software drives the motor to drive the turbine to push out the air. The only thing that's in there, and all that kind of testing is called verification, right? I have a specification, and my test shows that this meets the same specification. There's another kind of testing called validation. And these terms vary depending on your industry, but in a medical device world, validation says this device works how I would expect it to work if I were a professional in the field. So if you're building a ventilator, you have a respiratory therapist come and run a scenario. You've got this hooked up to a fake lung and the device, and they go in and act like that was a real patient and do their testing. And I don't know a way to automate, does it work like a person expects, right? That's still got to be manual.
Okay.
But everything else is very well suited to automation, right? And And so, no, I disagree with the idea that TDD would do that. If you thought about it as all I'm going to do is unit test the individual modules, functions, classes, yeah, that's not sufficient, right? The whole thing has to work together too. But
Okay.
this has always been the testing pyramid, right? You have the testing by the validation when you got it in the hands of the real person. That's a small amount of test, right? They're nowhere near the amount of tests that you put in the unit test, right? Your whole team, every engineer on the team is writing, you know, dozen or so unit tests a day. Right? So you get a ton of those.
Yeah.
And how many hundred of those add up to a product level specification? And you probably have 1 or 5 or 12 tests of a product level specification, right? The one, does it work the way we expect? Checking across the range, checking the out of range conditions, kind of zombie your way through that process.
Yeah.
But so you end up with a ton of the unit tests and a smaller number of tests as you neck down. As you go up the V, you get this inverse, the testing pyramid of volume of tests.
Okay. Okay. Cool. 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 Yeah, and I have one more follow-up question. Sorry, Chris. I know we probably have to transition, but
Oh,
I'm just
you're okay.
so
Go ahead.
interested. Uh, so at the top of the pyramid in this kind of safety critical world, how big of a problem is flakiness and overhead from those kind of tests? Or have you guys figured that out?
Oh, well, I mean, the does it work like you expected test, there's a certain amount of perception in that. And so you have several, you
Hmm.
probably don't have one person testing, you probably have a
Okay.
dozen different people, and you're sort of summing the results and you're trying to understand the outliers.
Okay.
And they're quality testing professionals who sort of shepherd these groups, set up the cases. We may set up software to make their setups easy, by the way. We may do things to
Hmm.
make their testing go faster. We may also automate collection of what happened, right? You
Sure.
can record, what's every touch on the user interface. What
Mm.
did they dial? What pressures actually came out? And you can record the whole session and use that to analyze what went wrong.
Yeah.
Once you get into anything automated, um, you definitely have to get it to where it works the same time every time. And
Mm.
that's the more sort of hardware you have in the loop, the more variables that you put in there, the harder that becomes.
Yeah.
But you have to invest time into it and
Okay.
make it work, because otherwise you fight the um, false positives, right? I've got an error that says something's broken, and if it's not broken, then you start ignoring your test results. Right?
Yeah.
So you have to go keep the flakiness out. By the way, this sort of environment really does well with the idea of zero bugs. And a lot of you'd be stunned at most of the safety critical world doesn't go to a zero bug sort of philosophy. They go in and say, well, this is okay because we'll write something in the manual. But again, if you're doing this test driven feedback and you're expecting a continuous delivery mindset, I've got a product that would be safe to use every day of the week. Um, then you have to knock down those bugs, because you can't ignore something and go, oh, well, we know about that, because you'll drown in that, right? Really,
Yeah.
really quickly.
Yeah. Cool. Cool.
And it's, again, no different than other, software world. It's just the
Yeah.
implications of leaving those bugs and drowning in
Yeah.
it is possibly worse.
Nice.
All right. Well, we wanted to get to this other topic of what do we do when mobbing is not an option. So we have a few minutes to talk about that. So yeah, let's go ahead and dive into that.
Yeah. Well, I had an interesting change of career, and I have taken on a role as a sole contributor for a company. We're making green energy products, and I am the only embedded systems engineer in the company. I have a handful of software engineers that are doing server level products that talk, over a LoRa network to the actual end devices that I'm writing the code for. But you have a person who's been pairing or mobbing for the last 20 or more than 20 years, and I'm now an individual out on an island. And it's been a very interesting experience, sort of trying to build new habits of how to work that and how to apply um, what I know from working in small groups into working as a mob of one. So
So
Yeah.
it's been different.
Yeah. So how has it been different? What are the what I think I'm most interested in like what from mobbing have you pulled into that environment and what makes you excited about it?
um, it's been a very interesting, plus or minus. Part of it has been dealing with, frankly, a little bit of loneliness, right? I've gone from being in a, constant conversation at a very sort of noisy, high chatter sort of environment into a very quiet, uh, and just alone with your own thoughts kind of thing. And that's been interesting to deal with. Part of it is mobbing gives you a real uh, momentum, right? Anytime you're sort of, I'm running out of an idea, you have somebody else to say, hey, but what if we did this? What if we did this? Somebody else to spot the holes in your test cases, somebody to hold you accountable when you're, well, I guess we can do that later, right? We can clean that up later. You don't have somebody holding you accountable for that. And so I've tried various things on that. And one of them is, can I act like that other person? And this is do you go and work for a little while, stop, and then go back and step away from the code for a little bit, have a cup of coffee, whatever, come back and say, okay, now I'm going to look at it as though I were another person in the mob who's going to come in and give me
Yeah.
feedback.
I like it. I like it. Like if you're playing the mod programming RPG by yourself with pulling up a random card, right?
Mm-hmm.
So spend 20 minutes as the navigator, and then spend another 20 minutes as the nose. Uh, Go away, come back, maybe look at it as the traffic cop or the automationist, and be a different role each time. I like that idea. It's like a solitaire version of the game.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Um, I take notes a lot for what you would think of as retrospectives and the like. Honestly, a lot of my teams did retros where we wrote things down and had a huge backlog of everything we'd written anyway. So that habit helps out quite a bit as well as how do you hold yourself accountable? And so some of those keeping notes, if I got to clean up this, I have to clean up this, this needs to be better. Those sorts of things, and going back and reflecting, have I done that? Am I really making those things better? And going and then, putting your big pants on and going, okay, I have to face up and do these things that for whatever reason I pushed off.
Yeah.
Um,
It reminds me, so like I will do I'll work on video games in my free time, and uh if I record my development, I'm much more likely to write tests, more and better tests, and also be more conscious about my code. So often everything tends to come out nicer when it's recorded. And so but yeah, that's involving another person to bring to into your process, right? Or another, a viewer or something. But sometimes you don't have that internally. So I like this idea of shifting persona, right?
Nice. Nice. That's cool. And I like this is a pretty interesting idea that I've I always joke that when the mob leaves me alone, like if someone has to go to this meeting and then someone else has to take care of this or that, and I'm alone for an hour, I'll be like, oh, the mob continued. I just debated against myself the whole time, and I'm more confused, when it's just me because there's no one else to sort out the debates in my head. Um, but yeah, I really like this idea, and you're right, Chris. It's almost like making it public in some way does help with that. It's almost like I've heard in other contexts called as like living in a glass house.
Yeah.
So if you set up yourself to be transparent, it's almost like there's another person there or could be there at any moment. And so I've had the same effect maybe from if I'm coding alone to start a meeting by myself in a public area, like remotely. Or I guess the in-person version would be like in a public space, start coding. So someone could interject or could see what I was doing and take on one of these other roles. And I guess maybe your mind or brain tricks yourself to be better because you're like, well, someone might ask me what I'm doing. And then I would have to confess if I was like, No, I've just written like, 5,000 lines with no tests, and it's going to be a terrible mess, and it's going to take me 2 months to unwind it, or something. I don't know. But yeah, I like this thought a lot. And I think, I don't know, maybe I wonder if you've had this feeling that sometimes I feel like I want to go code alone, and I'll go do it for a while enough until I'm like, okay, I'm ready for the mob again. It sounds like you maybe already hit that part, Phil, already.
I'm actually in the mode where I'm at the opposite point, where now my learning time, I don't go write codes on my own. I seek out groups that are doing
Ah,
uh,
yes, I see.
doing sort of learning experiences. So I'm
Yeah.
spending a lot more time seeking out groups that are doing talks online, groups that are doing katas on groups. I'm some of the folks
Mm,
that are the sort of server programmers. Occasionally, I'll get them suckered in to come write katas with me, and um, we'll go to that. So that they're
Yeah.
all the embedded systems written in Rust. So there's some interest in learning Rust on the team. So we'll come together, and I can
nice.
tempt them to come write Rust with me for a little while. And just getting that social time of having a different mind is really,
Yeah.
really helpful.
Nice.
Well,
Very nice.
I do see some situations where somebody with different skill sets, comes in and mobs a firmware engineer mobbing with the cloud team, or the cloud engineers mobbing with the firmware team. And that can have a really positive impact, and possibly even do full stack, I'm going to write the API on the firmware device to then communicate to the API in the cloud, communicate to the UI, all that stuff. And sometimes you might be able to then deliver something like that a lot faster in that way. Single piece
Mhm.
whip
Nice.
sort of stuff,
Nice.
flow efficiency.
Cool, cool.
Yeah.
Well, we are coming to the end of our time box here. We have a couple minutes left. And I guess what I'm sensing from this is that there's a healthy amount of social and non-social time, and you have to find it one way or another, maybe. But before we run out of time, Phil, is there anything you'd like to share or plug before we close?
I think I might mention my current employer is as I say, a green energy company called Kelvin. We make we make insulated boxes for radiators in old legacy steam heated buildings. And this lets people control how much heat comes into their room and keeps them from opening the window to keep the room too cool when the radiators are too hot, which is something as a Southern Californian I wasn't aware of. But
Yeah, that's a
apparently,
thing.
you have to set the boiler to keep the coldest room in a building to a certain temperature, which means two-thirds of the people in the building are sweating, and so it's the middle of winter, snow's coming down, and half the building's got its windows open. And so we make these intelligent boxes that wrap around the radiator, a fan, and a little computer, and it talks radio off to the cloud, and then we use that to figure out how hard you have to drive the boiler. We cut the boiler heating costs by 25, 33%, cut down all the emissions, and make everybody's life a little bit better for more comfort. And so if you live in a legacy steam heated building, it might be a great thing to bring up with your co-op and see if they want to bring one of our cozies in. If you're interested in writing uh, either some embedded software or some server software, this might be a good place for you to land. So
Nice, nice, awesome. Well, yeah, thanks for
I,
sharing
I,
that. And being in Southern
I
California
do.
as well, I needed the explanation. So, but yes, go
You
ahead.
made no sense. I do want to just give one nod out. One of the things on our first topic that we brought up of where do you learn something? Where do you go
Yeah.
from? I have just finished my second read through of Dave Farley's Modern Software Engineering book. And if I were to hand to a new engineer, how should you work? How should you go about it? That would be my best first book for somebody to read. Or if you want to look at how do I transfer your career, I think that does it the right way. Thinks a lot about the feedback loops, thinks about the people side. So it's I would say the current state of the art if I were to go one place. So I'm really delighted to have found it and have something to give to the young engineers to look at these days.
Fantastic. Thank you for that recommendation. And thank you so much for Phil for joining us and sharing your excellent experiences and insights and thoughts. It's been a really fun conversation. To our audience, if you know other people who are interested in naming this awesome thing, this movement we're part of, and how do we talk about it, what do we name it, all that kind of stuff, please share this episode. If you know others who are in safety critical, high reliability, regulated, how to apply XP and these things to get out that goodness. And also what it's like to mob solo, to go solo after mobbing. And please share this episode with somebody. Please like, subscribe. You can reach out to us to chit chat on LinkedIn, Twitter, YouTube, and more. And mob on, and have a good one, everybody. Bye.
Bye, everyone.